Let's get the thoughts then of governance expert. It's Peter Goss joining us this morning. And I suppose, morning Peter, this is the moment that I think a lot of people in the country have been waiting for, because a lot of bombshells were dropped during that interview with eNCA Larson. And yes, government's been saying they want clarity, Eskom saying they want clarity, but I suppose the public also wants some details. We want some names, don't we?
We certainly do. It seems like it's moved on already. Last night we had some announcements in international media that it's no longer the billion rand number. It's actually more than a billion rand per week number. So he's moving that on. I have my doubts about whether names will be mentioned today in Parliament. One must differentiate the parliamentary inquiry from the criminal justice system. We expect too much from these inquiries, and I just fear that it's going to be once again a bit of political jockeying for the best type of question, as opposed to really getting out evidence that will help us to open a case, not to resolve corruption allegations by Ruyter. Here's the big challenge. Good governance calls for a CEO to have a relationship with the board, who in turn have a relationship with something we call the executive authority. The executive authority is the politician that's responsible. In this case, Andre had those channels. His board, the executive authority, and not trusting those, then go to SCOPA. Now, he's been to SCOPA many times, and he had many opportunities to table these allegations and concerns he has. This broad blanket billion per month, now more than a billion per month statement, I'm not sure we're going to get more in Parliament than he was able to give to law enforcement. He's opened many cases with the Hawks. He has reported corruption to the DPCI in terms of the Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act. So this contention by some ministers and the President that he should report to law enforcement, I think that has been done.
Help me understand then, if these things have been brought up in the past at SCOPA and charges laid with the Hawks, for example, as well, why was there such an explosive reaction to the interview that he had with eNCA? If all of this was done, or is it just because it wasn't receiving the kind of attention that the eNCA interview got?
I think what was sensational about it was that he now brought to bear the subject of a billion rand, on the one hand. On the other hand, two senior politicians or two ministers, if one was to interpret it, to look closely into it. So those two matters raise its profile in the eye of the politicians, SCOPA, group of politicians, and in the public eye. So I don't think we're going to get much more groundbreaking coming forward, other than, I suspect, more sensational statements.
How do we try and get to a point of accountability? And in this case, I suppose you're a governance expert, so I'm going to ask the obvious cliche question: good governance of Eskom moving forward and accountability if names aren't given, if departments aren't given, because then it all just becomes speculative. It gives those various parties, even unnamed, it gives them an out. Unless they're named, it gives them, well, they might not be talking about us.
I fear that the reason names haven't been mentioned is because the substance of evidence that allows one to point a finger at Joe Soap and say, Minister Joe Soap is the one responsible for this corruption. Andre doesn't have that. If he had that, I see no reason why a public office bearer's name should not come next to an allegation of corruption involving that particular transaction A, B, or C. So the reason we don't have names, I refuse to accept it's a person trying to blow the whistle and protect himself. I think we're not getting names because there isn't evidence supporting who those might be and exactly what they've done. So we're not going to get names from Parliament either. I mean, if we had by now, he's made a submission, formal submission to Parliament. That submission is no longer top secret. It was released last night by some media sources, and you don't see names in that either.
Yeah, excuse me, I saw the dossier earlier this morning as well, and I'm sure if you want to go find it, you can do that while we wait for 9 o'clock this morning. So then I have to ask the question, excuse me, something stuck in my throat. Peter, what are we really expecting today then? Are we just ticking off a box? The request was for the former CEO to appear before SCOPA, tick. Get some answers, tick. We're moving on with our lives, tick. Is that where we are?
It's as cynical as that might sound. It's frightening the position we're going to end up with. We're going to end up with the position of ticking a box. SCOPA called. So what's the argument? One, the minister's one minister's name was mentioned in this matter. He's done nothing about it. Apparently, he says, well, go to the police, Pravin Gordhan. Two, the president says, accusations are he's done nothing about it. What does the president say? Go to the police. SCOPA now says, well, we know about it. Let's look like we're doing something about it. For me, that's what we're doing. We're ticking boxes. Are we going to get a massive foul swoop of good evidence today in SCOPA? No, we're not. We're going to get political rhetoric. We're going to get political point scoring. We're going to get people pretending to be investigators and judges and prosecutors in the SCOPA hearing.
It is elections next year,
It
so
is
we
elections.
expect these things.
There we go. Look, I'm not a politician. I don't want to go into that arena, but I think that we must go back to what can we draw from this for the better governance of Eskom and other state-owned entities. I think that's a very important question. State-owned entities have a governance structure for the resolution of criminal conduct and corruption. Recently, we saw Eskom saying, we're not going to announce in our annual financial statements criminal conduct, losses arising from criminal conduct. This is a classic example of why we need that exemption to be withdrawn forever, on the one hand. Two, there are channels for the reporting of corruption for a CEO in a position of authority a la Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act. One, he reports to his board. His board does nothing, he goes to his minister, the executive authority. The executive authority does nothing, he goes to SCOPA unequivocally with these matters and he reports them. If the buck doesn't stop with a CEO of a state-owned company, somebody we entrusted with the title accounting officer, we're in trouble.
What would Eskom's goal out of this be today? Do you feel it's going to just be the run-of-the-mill after this? Is anything going to change off the back of what gets said today? Whether there's names or no names, the expectation is no names going to be dropped. Do you get a sense that Africa is going to be able to watch this, get to the end of Arno de Ruyter appearing before SCOPA and going, okay, now we're on the right track to try and get on top of the issues with Eskom? Or is this going to just fly in the wind of more rhetoric that we're used to in our country?
Sadly, we already have a preamble for that. Minister Gordon says we have reported cases, we have acted against McKinsey, we have acted against ABB. The President says, report this to the Hawks, let the Hawks do something. De Ruyter has said he's reported many cases to the Hawks. I think the matter's in the criminal justice system. Will something major come out of today? No, not for the purposes of accountability and holding someone to account. What you'll get from today is merely SCOPA saying they've exercised the authority, they've heard the man, law enforcement is investigating.
And so when we now start talking about the timing around the whole thing as well, because I want to just play a part of Andre de Ruyter's interview with Annika Larsen in a moment, which we'll get to in a second. Why do you think Andre de Ruyter then dropped the bombshells the way he did as well? Would there not have been a better way of doing it? Was it trying to get in there with good PR before government could have their say? Or was this a man who just had enough and was walking away and was dropping napalm on the situation?
I'm not sure that he was dropping napalm on the situation. I think he battled. When you're inside the system, when you're an accounting officer, a CEO reporting, as I said, to an executive, to an accounting authority, the board, and this executive authority, you're part of the system. You shout, you meet people, you report to them that I see this corruption, I see some people at the senior level interfering in our business, trying to access contracts. Those to whom you report don't give you any sense that they're keen on pursuing matters. I doubt they said to him, go to the Hawks to report in terms of the Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act. I think he held his ammunition dry. I think he's now left. He doesn't have to beg anybody for their position or protect his position as CEO. And now he's made it clear that, look, there are a couple more people involved and there's more happening around us in this matter. I just hope he'd give us more detail. If he gives us detail, we can investigate better. Hawks can investigate better. People can be held to account better. I think he needs to be a bit braver and drop names.
Yeah, I was about to say, in the absence of dropping names, at least give more details. I think there is a concern that he is worried about his own life and the security of his own life as well, which I'm going to ask you about in a moment. But the reason I want to take us to this particular soundbite where we're talking about, it was trending on Twitter, I'm sure you remember this, enabling people to eat is one of the phrases that's eat at the trough, eat from the trough. That's right. So if you want to just remind yourself what part of the interview said, it was Andre de Ruyter saying he tried to reach out, exactly what Peter's saying, trying to reach out to senior ministers and the president, scaling things up about the concerns of criminal activity at Eskom as well, saying in one of his attempts he was told, and listen to this, he was told in order to pursue the greater good, he had to enable the people to eat. Take a listen.
I shared the information with a minister. I think I shouldn't mention names, but I did share it, and as well as with senior advisors to the president himself. I never informed the president personally, but I certainly gave the message through, which, by the way, I'm obliged by law to do.
Is Eskom a feeding trough, if you like, for the ANC?
I would say the evidence suggests that it is. I expressed my concern to a senior government minister about attempts, in my view, to water down governance around the $8.5 billion that, by and large, through Eskom's intervention, we got at COP26. And the response was essentially, you have to be pragmatic. You have to, in order to pursue the greater good, you have to enable some people to eat a little bit.
Oh, so that was from the interview with eNCA Larson, Peter. And again, very careful not to give any names, just a senior government official, a senior minister, about eating and enabling people to eat as well. And I want to ask you this, because I have another soundbite I'd like to play from Andre de Ruyter. You talk about going to SCOPA, or first of all reporting it to the board, then reporting it to the governing authority, then going to SCOPA, etc., etc. Here's the problem, though. He also tells eNCA Larson that even though he had reported a lot of these things and reporting incidents of fraud, etc., no arrests were made. He felt like there was no consequences, even if he did try. Would you agree with that?
I agree that the law enforcement system, the role of senior politicians and how seriously they take corruption, these are matters all in serious, begging question. The president can initiate an inquiry into these matters if his name is associated with these matters. What is his name? How is his name mentioned? It is alleged he's doing nothing about it. It's alleged that Pravin Gordhan is doing nothing about it. The least they can do is initiate urgent inquiries into these matters. They are going to contend, well, we have it with law enforcement. Law enforcement must take its course. I think it's a bit of a cop-out to leave it there. For Andre to now report at this late hour after he's gone, while he was in that dilemma of being exposed to corruption allegations, and not making that kind of noise while he was CEO, leaves a sour taste in the mouth. He was the accounting officer. He had the duty to report. A whistleblower has a different standing. When you're part of the system, you can't claim whistleblower status. You have to stand up and be counted, because you've given this responsibility to look after these assets. So all you're doing is propagating the corrupt system by not standing up and being counted. So I wish during his time he would have stood up and done exactly this, saying, look, I've reported to Gordhan, I've reported to other parties, nothing was done, I'm now giving it to SCOPA, just as he's going to give it now, let SCOPA handle it, he's done his work. So I think it's a bit late in the day, and we're not going to see more, perhaps because he knows he had nothing at the time he was trying to report.
It's going to be interesting to see if he has any more today. The reason I asked the question about the consequences and the no arrest as claimed by Andre de Ruyter, because that's exactly what he said in part of that interview with eNCA Larson. I was going to play one more bite from that interview as well, just so you can understand exactly the wording that Andre de Ruyter used. Let's take a listen.
Cricket's really nothing at all. In fact, when we have managed to make arrests, in one instance we managed to effect the arrest of a buyer who had bought on behalf of Eskom knee guards, which you use when you have to kneel to do welding or whatever the case may be. Now, these things cost about 320 Rand a pair at Builders Warehouse. We paid 80,000 Rand each. So the arrest was effected. I insisted that we had the equivalent of a perp walk at the power station.
To make an example of...
Exactly, to demonstrate that we were taking crime seriously. But the following day, the individual was released, no charges, on the instructions of a senior police officer. Now, you have to say, how is this possible? So I think it's fair to say that the response of the South African police hitherto has been disappointing. We have shared some of the intelligence that we've gathered with select officers. I don't particularly want to talk about that too much because I don't want to compromise their investigation, which is not really that popular internally. But I think also, if you look at state security, I mean, this is an existential threat to the state. And my non-legal definition of treason is if you take money to do something that is to the detriment of the state. So there are acts of treason going on a daily basis in Mpumalanga, and state security are just missing in action. They did see fit, however, to send one of their agents to COP27 to keep an eye on me. When one of my friends asked him what he was doing there, he said, no, just keeping an eye on the big guy. So clearly I'm under suspicion of treasonous activity, but the real culprits can act with impunity. Now, I don't know. These things are Kafkaesque.
So final question to you then, Peter Goss, on accountability of CEOs and responsibilities. From what we're hearing there, and I know we're going back a couple of months, we're going to have Andre de Ruyter appearing this morning at SCOPA. Is there really much more from a governance side, apart from what Andre de Ruyter explained in that interview, that he could have done as a CEO? And was he ever really in with a chance?
We've said what he could have done. Because some buck stops with him, he should have made this noise earlier. One. That doesn't remove from the dynamics of the environment being not one that's friendly for CEOs to report. He's not the first person to make allegations like this. You have it in the Department of Public Enterprises right now, where the DG is being charged, the former DG or DG is being charged, and the accusation as well, now you're levelling allegations because you are being charged. I think many people in government office bearers have this dilemma. The dilemma of whether or not their political principles will respond to their concerns, confront their concerns, and address them with investigation and consequence for that. Consequence in the case of evidence being tabled. The challenge is how fast one can investigate, gather evidence that's credible to prosecute someone on the other side. And that's the dilemma we have here. He says, nothing happened about what I reported. It doesn't raise confidence for CEOs, for the general public. Even imagine the general public. Now imagine the consumer or customer of Eskom, who's been exposed to a corruption request by a person working for Eskom. So we really have a dilemma with confronting allegations, investigating those allegations, and taking prompt, decisive action against criminals. Law enforcement will argue the criminal justice system is slow. Well, it's our job to make it faster as law enforcement. It's the politicians who oversee law enforcement to make it faster. We can't keep saying it's just slow and due process must take its course. Due process, yes, but make due process faster. It can be done.
Can be done. It certainly can be done. We've seen it happen before as well when right people are in the right places. Peter, thank you very much for coming in. I took a bit more time than I think we were expecting to, but lovely talking to you. Wonderful analysis, a wonderful insight. Peter Goss, governance expert. A reminder as well, Andre de Ruyter appearing virtually this morning in front of SCOPA, appearing before SCOPA, Standing Committee of Public Accounts. We're expecting that to begin at 9 o'clock here on eNCA.